and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. Today, we are beginning our discussion on Street of Too Many Stories by Denise Chávez.
We back.
How's everyone?
Good.
How about yourself?
It's been a while.
Silence was
I
so
feel like it's
loud.
been a while. But
It has.
maybe like a month or something.
Which
I think so.
could be a bit, you know.
Yeah.
I know that we had been covering a lot of poetry, so we told ourselves, you know what? Let's do short stories. And what happened from that?
And then we let Raina choose the book.
And I was like, this one has stories in the title, so let's
To be
do
fair,
this one.
we all were like, yeah, let's do it. And which is great but of course, once we actually received the books, we noticed that right underneath it says a novel, which is fine. We're back at a novel.
Yeah.
We are, but it
It's been-
still reads like a short story collection.
Yeah, which is like brings me back to Poet X. You know, we were reading poems, but overall it was cohesive enough in that sense that it was almost novel-like too.
Yeah.
And speaking of Poet X, it's been 5 years that we've had this show. So congrats to us, I guess.
Congrats, you guys.
We totally planned that segue.
And to the little Larrys.
Yeah.
That's right. But
We
thanks for listening.
We welcome any tips. You know, this is all a voluntary endeavor. So you can drop it there in Spotify and subscribe.
Pick up a book
Pick up a book.
and pick up a podcast about books
Yeah.
like us.
That is a good thing to, I guess, remind ourselves and remind listeners that, you know, this is like a labor of love that you all came up with, and no one's getting paid to do this. You know, it's voluntary. We come on Sundays, you know, so all that to say that it's something that we all love to do. And we hope that you love listening to our little podcast.
Yeah, because if I may add, you know, we do get a lot of requests, but it's hard because, like, we already have our own little library of books, of lists, you know, of books that we want to get to, and so that list keeps getting bigger and bigger, and
Yeah.
but
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna have to add House on Mango Street because
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. She was shocked.
everyone on this
Shocked.
podcast, besides me, has not read the book, and I'm like, oh my gosh. We don't have to do it for the podcast, but
Yeah.
it's still your homework.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, but maybe it's, you know, I do think this podcast and its mission overall is to promote literacy and reading. So maybe we can do something community based around House on Mango Street, and you know, something that, since it's our 5-year anniversary, it's a good moment for introspection. You know, I think when we started, I didn't see as much, but definitely nowadays I see about so many book clubs. I hear about like these silent book clubs, like little social gatherings. Judd with Brave Books is always doing book talks and like these little sessions in his porch. So not to mention all the stuff with UTEP and creative writing and all that stuff that's happening.
Paso
So,
matters.
exactly. So it's just, to me, nice to see all these things happening.
Yeah.
And we should celebrate that a little bit more.
yeah, I mean, there's still a friendly rivalry, but you know,
Because they're all my enemies, but lots of love.
He's like winking when he said friendly. You guys can't see it, but
right?
I didn't know there was a rivalry. Okay.
And she's like, we're all besties. And what is like my enemies?
What about the enemies of our enemies?
frenemies.
Frenemies. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That took a dark turn. But in a way, it does kind of fit the novel, right? Because it's a lot about complicated nature of family and relationships and friendships.
Good segue.
Yeah.
That was nice.
So I guess like the title really, Street of Too Many Stories, really sets it up because there are so many stories. And it's a novel that's less than 200 pages. It's 100 and 54 pages.
I have it in my brain.
Yeah. So it's really short, but it feels long. We can get into that. And yeah, it follows 4 families, residents on Encantada Street, which is on the border. The Fuentes family, the Chapa family, the Stillman family, the Blanco family. And it also has a list of ayudantes or helpers, which I think is really cool. So,
Yeah, I liked that they had that at the very beginning. I don't think I couldn't think of another book that we've read that has like the characters
Didn't
broken down or
Woman of
listed.
Light.
Oh, Women of
did,
Light. You're right.
and that helped a lot too. I think I'm wondering if this is something that comes later, or if it's like, okay, I'm going to list all these people who are going to come out in this book because there's going to be a lot, or if like later it's an editorial thing, like maybe you should list these characters and the time frames because that'll help your readers, you know.
Yeah. While reading it, it was definitely jumping around a lot in like timeline, and it was
And
kind of up to us
houses, yeah.
to contextualize, and she would drop hints to let us know like this character was dead or this person was still alive, and let us a little bit more about, or like what the character was going through, right? Because we see some characters as a kid, and then we see some characters like the same character old in age. So it's really interesting to jump around like that with I mean, not a whole lot of authorial direction, right? She leaves little seeds for us to figure it out. With that said, I had this page bookmarked and I kept going back to it, you know, just to kind of refresh, because also like a lot of the characters have nicknames, and she bounces around from their first name to their nickname to their last name, and sometimes names that I was like, wait a minute, where does that name come from? But you know, I was trying to add to the side here in the margins.
Yeah. Before going further, did you guys want to share like what you guys know about Denise Chávez? This is my first time reading her work, so
Same here.
yeah.
Again, that's so surprising to me because she's like been in Las Cruces for so long, and I don't know, she's to me, when I was reading Sandra Cisneros in college, I got introduced to Denise Chávez, and I, you know, just shout out to Dr. Garay, Joyce Garay, from NMSU, who like showed me these books because I probably wouldn't have seen them until later, or, you know, so, and these authors, right? And so I always thought Denise Chávez was like a pioneer too, in her own right. And I remember reading Last of the Menu Girls in college as an undergrad and really loving that book. Probably around the same time I read House on Mango Street.
Okay.
So I was very young, many, many years ago. But after that, I was like, oh, what else did she write? You know, and she wrote Loving Pedro Infante, and I love Pedro Infante too. So that's a huge book. She also wrote A Taco Testimony, which I ended up teaching in a lit class a few years back. And America and Anna were in that class. So that's when they met, a few former students who are still good friends of mine. So yeah, it was really nice to kind of like just see, for me, Denise's trajectory and how her voice is just resounding in these books, even though they're all completely different. You can still hear her voice. At least I can, knowing a little bit more about her. And this book is very much about community and bringing voices together. And she, if you know anything about her, you know, she still does a lot of that community work in Las Cruces. So she's still very active. You know, writing this book, I think it took her 7 years to complete. I was reading. So I, you know, she's still doing a lot.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of my intro to.
Her first book was Face of an Angel, I think, and she had mentioned writing, taking a while, like a long time, 7 years too, right?
Yeah, I haven't read that one.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't read any of her stuff. I may have read passages. One of the professors at when I was at UTEP, Meredith Abarca, she wrote a lot about food, so I imagine she may have had us read passages from Denise. And I met Denise actually online post-pandemic. So I had gotten a little bit of a reputation for the online mics that I started doing when everything closed down. I learned Zoom and how to broadcast and really worked that technology. So via, I forgot who recommended me, but an organization, Wise Latina International, reached out to me and had me do the tech for a series of workshops that they had funded in 2021. And of course, one of those was with Denise Chávez. So that was pretty cool. I was rereading email threads that Denise was in, and she really wanted to focus on family. So she actually had people who were signed up for the workshop submit family photos of a family member. And that was kind of the focus on what we would write on. And after reading this, it's like, okay, yes, this is what Denise was really interested, has been really interested in, like our connection to our family and understanding that families aren't perfect. There is a lot of bad stuff here. And I guess, it's maybe not for the second half, but like the focus on healing and forgiveness, despite all that, there's a lot, but it was a pretty powerful workshop because, you have people start writing about family, and very much like in the book, it's a lot of stuff we don't talk about. It's like the stuff that's unspoken. So writing about it lets it come out and really create just, if a catharsis for whoever's writing it and remembering. So that always kind of stuck with me. And so we've been like online friends ever since. I look forward to her talk at UTEP. So that's for me. I don't know about you guys.
This is my first introduction to Denise Chávez. Yeah, I don't really know much about her like you guys do.
Yeah, me too. I of course had heard of her, and then I did notice the Dr. Leva, who's our colleague at UTEP and runs the Humanities Collaborative at EPCC and UTEP, that is actually making Denise's visit possible. And then the press itself also is interesting. It seems like it's a new press, Conocimientos Press. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Flower Song in terms of their focus. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. I wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
And I guess also the cover, I think, is worth mentioning because it's a depiction here of the street. You get a sense of like the architecture. There's little homages to some of the stories, the ones we don't know and know, and the mountains in the background. When you promoted it, Reina, you did a really cool thing. Do you want to tell us about that?
So by my house, I can see the mountains in El Paso, but the ones in the book, on the book cover, look like a little more like the Oregon mountains in New Mexico. So I just had like a little forefront background, like mountain thing going on to promote podcasting, National Podcasting Day. Yeah, but this cover is really, it's beautiful. And it does kind of hint at the different stories and objects and really bringing to the forefront, like the street, right? The street that carries all of these memories and stories.
Yeah, there's some nice Easter eggs in there.
So I say if you do read the book, you take a similar photo. Maybe like it could be like a challenge, tag it and then tag Denise. Tag the press, and because I remember that's a cool viral marketing type thing. One of my friends, when he released an album, the album image was like kind of like the top of his head cut off at like kind of just below the eyes. So he had like a metaphysics face challenge where people would put the album up and cover and do the rest of their face, and it was a fun little thing, but it like kind of put more reach out. So maybe you guys can do the Street of Too Many Stories challenge, and get a little cool little match up the mountains. Because I thought that looked really nice.
Yeah.
Thanks. Shout out to physics too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really helpful to have the 4 families listed. And she also gives us an intro, which kind of goes over every family story in a very concise way.
Yeah, it's like a little spark notes.
Yeah. And then she gets into the chapters, the short. They're all really short chapters. But yeah, it does kind of jump around quite a bit. So we were talking pre-show about having to really annotate, pause and okay, this is this person, and going back to that, like you said, Richie, the cheat sheet.
Yeah, I mean, even in each section, who would be speaking or whose point of view would change, from paragraph to paragraph. Like, oh wait, hold on, that shifted.
And Denise has a background in theater, and I think you can really see that too. Just even in the intro, it's like a small town, a small street, 4 families in Encantada, New Mexico, right? It has the theatrical vibe to it. And
Stage, was it the...
Yeah, stage directions, right? It reads a lot like that. And with all the voices, I think if we were to see this as a play, it would be a lot easier to follow. Or interesting to see the voices and the different people coming from different places, right?
You have the chorus, all the ancestors, which it actually kind of took me a while, even though she says it in the intro, the wind, right? And in this case, the wind is not just the wind. What did you guys think of the name of the street in the town in Encantada?
When I first learned of it, it kind of reminded me of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the whole magical realistic view,
That's what I expected a lot of too, as a reference to that. And plus the families, that's a huge thing in Cien Años as well. I thought of, it's obviously a reference to the land of enchantment, but it also did make me think of the thing that's throughout the book, this idea that it's enchanting, but in the enchantment I also think of a spell or a curse, and that's something that comes up to a lot of the characters. They feel like they're cursed, so an enchantment could be kind of that thing that's stuck with them as well.
What stood out to you guys in the first half, the first 70 pages?
I kind of wish I didn't read the intro, because I read the intro, she does a lot of exposition on the characters, and a lot of it's revealing what she already revealed in the intro. And I felt like if I hadn't read that, it would have been, I think, more interesting as it unrevealed. So I was kind of reading stuff I already expected because I read the intro.
You think it would be better to not have the intro, or to include it as an epilogue or something?
Maybe. I do like how she mentions other things in the intro, like the symbol for rain. A mention of the animals, ancestors taking the form of animals like crows. I did like that. I would have loved that in the beginning too. That would have set a theme, but I don't know. Just maybe the summary of the story of the families, but maybe because we knew it, we could focus on other aspects of the story, reading this for some reason reminded me of a British literature class that I took with Dr. Jayasurya. She talks about Virginia Woolf, how she has this concept of characters being deep, right? Having this richness to them, like tunnels that you could explore. And I felt with a lot of this characterization, right, that they have this past to them and these moments in their lives that are always with them, where almost every time it's this character's turn in the story, in the novel, you get references at different points in the life, like the piñata. That one comes up as references as this big moment when Vicky was a little girl, and her dad threw this party with all the neighborhood, and that's just such a big memory that it comes up every now and then, even as when Vicky's at different ages. So I thought, so going back to again like this idea of characters having these deep tunnels, that's a really great way of characterization. You were talking about that before we started, Vanessa, right?
Yeah, I think that's what stood out to me the most in this first half was just the way that the characters are described. You get a lot of their details, a lot of the experiences that they went through, mostly because of their families.
Yeah.
There's some trauma that happens. But you get to see a lot of like, I guess like kind of little glimpses into their pasts before you get into like the second half.
Yeah.
So you kind of have a really clear idea of who each of these people are and things that have affected them to make them the way that they are.
And not all of them are lovable, right? Like, I mean, pretty much right away, like we see Mundo, who's already like old and like have to be taken care of. But to me, what stands out is almost, I think, and there's a chapter right after that where he's a kid and he's loving and he's very sensitive. And it kind of goes into how like some of the trauma that we have is cyclical, you know, that kind of goes into that right away where he remembers his dog Pasajero and has to leave him behind. And because he's so sad and crying because of it, to his father, right? That's weakness. And, you know, you see how a little boy like that ends up becoming, I mean, there's more to it, right? He has to go, like they send him off to go work with a señor and something happened. We don't know what happens. He comes back different and really quickly kind of get a sense of what this is going to be because of those quick like little churns. Like here's Mundo when he's older and he's a womanizer and he's terrible. And we haven't even heard how terrible he is yet, but here he is as a kid, you know, crying and his dad being tough on him and his brother, they're making fun of him. So it's really deep in that way.
Yeah, definitely, because it's already going into the themes of like machismo and like toxic masculinity, how to define family, right? Because, you know, they tell him, ni familia ni que familia, right, with the dog. And I totally get that, right? That's probably my favorite part from the first half is like, well, dog is family, right? And you kind of also see, like you were saying, kind of reminds me, now that I'm thinking of it, of Cassie, right? Talking about her dad and the dogs, the puppies, the kittens. You know, the same idea of like how people view other beings.
Oh, yeah. And that is contrasted here because you have a character, Michael, who goes on these walks and he communicates with the animals. And he emphasizes how important that is. And to me, Michael's like one of my favorite characters. Early Michael. Yeah. To be fair, like there's a passage here where he's 17 and he feels that thing like a lot of people feel in their hometown. Where like, I got to get out. Especially with his family because there's so many of them, and it's he doesn't really feel his individuality, which he wants to explore, which is natural, right? But yeah, to me that's another like parallel, right, from Mundo as a kid learning to like not care about that to Michael here wanting to, even Linda, right? Makes a point to like, but that's the second half of the book, I think, more.
Yeah, just to go back to the machismo point, there were a lot of passages I did find, and not just machismo, but marianismo that I see, like, since there are a lot of female characters and like how the toxic masculinity affects them and the whole family, and how, like you said, Richie, it is cyclical and it just continues to pass on to the next generation. And
I feel like there's a lot in the first section, especially when we hear a lot about the children and why a lot of families move here from Mexico or from elsewhere, is this idea of hope. And we hear that a lot. And then we attach a lot to like the American dream that comes up a little bit. And like the loss of that hope. Like that's kind of something people struggle with throughout, you know, like our kids are going to be the ones to like make this happen, which I think we get through the lens of both Michael and Linda. What happens when you have these really high expectations put on yourself and nothing happens, right? They're both alcoholics. They're dealing with their own types of trauma as well. So I think through Linda, we get a lot of her questioning her past and her traumas, and both. She's in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? What do they call it? The
AA club or
the
Yeah,
Arid Club. Arid Club, yeah. But she has those questions like, what makes a good person? What makes a good man? What makes a good woman?
I think like loss of innocence is probably a huge theme for a lot of these characters, just in what you're saying, Richie, and what you were saying too, Jorge.
And even with the machismo thing, and you said marianismo, remind me of that term. Is that just like the perpetuation of that structure still?
Yeah, like the roles that women need to fulfill because of it, right?
Okay, yeah, you definitely have a lot of that. I think attached to that as well is just like, and it's also possibly tied into like Catholic guilt, right? But the idea of like not speaking with each other about stuff. Such a huge thing is everyone has their walls up in families, and I think there's a lot said about what's unspoken. You know, I felt like that was something that popped up all throughout this idea of what you don't say to people.
And maybe
And
that's
maybe you should.
what the role that the street has then is to hold all these stories and to like share them with everyone. It's like because nobody will share them with each other or outside of the street. It's kind of like it's all captured there.
Maybe, and also in that sense, I think back again to how Michael and even Linda later on can like hear the street through the animals and the just the little things, you know, stuff rolling around, like nature happening. It's the spirits talking, and that's the spirits who have stories to tell and they're checking in on the ancestors. And I think that's kind of an interesting way, and they're more perceptive of it. It's one of the things, right? Like about listening. I think on page 24, you have this whole section here where Michael is walking and he talks about his experience, right, of walking around. I like that passage. Yeah, I highlighted that one. But
And right before too, you know, what stood out to me in the first half is the world food, right? And given what you guys shared about, what you shared, Raina, about Denise, I mean, food is of course very important to her. You can tell. But here, you know, like, what is it? The red chile, right? The smell of red chile. He deeply inhaled the pungent and sweet smell of the chile pods.
oh, page 22, yeah.
Yeah, page 22. He told himself to smell the air and forget for a while the yawning, overwhelming fact he just didn't belong to these people. So just the raw food for these people, right? Just I kind of wanted more of that though, like you know, and that's kind of what gets me to like in terms of the writing style is, I mean it's. In some sense, is a bit more Carfian in terms of, you know, the lack of quotation marks and kind of jumping around with points of view. But a lot of it is like because of that third person narration that does make it hard to follow. And I know we've talked about it already, but that kind of, you know, I think the narration affects my ability to kind of just get into it.
So you were too focused on the structure and the craft to like it kept pulling you out. Yeah. Could see that.
Denise also had for her book launch for this book. She like invited everyone to like a little restaurant in Las Cruces.
Oh yeah,
yeah. So like food's huge.
Yeah,
huge part of her like life and bringing community together and stuff.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
I think if you live here in this region in the Southwest, you can identify a lot with those passages, the food. I remarked earlier about like there's a particular passage about the sunset Well, she mentions it a couple times, but I think if you're teaching this, it's an opportunity to look at descriptive writing, descriptive language, because we have such iconic sunsets here in the region, and I think that'd be a really cool writing exercise is to read how Denise writes about it, and then maybe have the students try and write a little paragraph where they describe the sunset, like maybe some characters doing something and the colors and the way it makes you feel. I'm looking for the passage here. Might have actually been in the second part, the sunset one at least. But I was thinking of the when Michael's smelling the chile and the food, right?
Yeah. And red chile is like a very New Mexico thing.
Red and green. The enchiladas.
There's that press, right? Red or Green Books named after it from New Mexico. Albuquerque, I think.
Yeah, I think I would have liked to see that a little more too.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's just because I like reading about food. I don't know what it would have added beyond, descriptive passages and imagery and stuff like that. I guess that's why, when I teach all the elements of fiction or poetry, right? It's like, well, we can't just check off the list and say, there's symbolism here, there's this, there's that. Some things are going to outweigh others, right? So if this story is focusing more on characters and less on imagery, then why do you think the author made that choice, right? So that's kind of what I was thinking about this too. It's like the emphasis for me is on the geographical location of Encantada Street, Encantada, New Mexico, and the people. Yeah. And everything else is secondary.
Yeah, because we never leave. When people leave, we don't hear about them not until they come back. Yeah. I was thinking with the food, I mean, it's always the attachment to family. Like the Stillmans, they had their ritual of always having ice cream, as a kind of a bonding experience.
Yeah, well, that's a good point because they do mention Juarez, of course, but that's where as someone who is from Juarez, I want it more where where
no, it was just the mention.
And so I think that limitation kind of held it back from being more developed in some ways.
Well, I mean, that's probably what turns this into a 300-page book. Which maybe I guess Denise didn't want. If she's working on it for 7 years, that means she's probably also editing out a lot too, and maybe the focus is just on the street,
right? Yeah, because if we start talking about Juarez or neighboring cities, and it's not about the street of too many stories.
Now you can do that through characters' memories, though, too, right?
True.
And I think that's something that maybe could have been explored, but. Of course, if there's too many stories, you're going to have too many, you can't add more.
Stories, there's already too many.
That's also kind of been one of my favorite creative writing prompts, though, like giving inanimate things, like if this tree could talk, what kind of stories would it tell?
In the wind here.
The spirits. I don't know, I kind of liked how... especially with Michael, he had these moments where he's really in tune with the moment, and to him, just the rustling of leaves through trees and trash blowing across the street and animals making sounds, just nature, is something very magical, which goes back to maybe to the magical part of it all, the Encantada, appreciating all those little moments.
There's also definitely a lot in terms of the effects of poverty, right? Because they have so many health problems, diabetes and that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, depressing because of if you did have insurance, if you did have, medical care, you wouldn't be this way maybe.
Well, I mean, but I think another thing, going back to the unspoken, they just didn't say anything. They were feeling stuff. They're feeling pain. probably knew something was wrong, but they didn't say anything. Like didn't
that's true.
take initiative to go get that looked at. Or
Yeah.
it is very sad, to see people fall apart, become emaciated. It's Letty, right, who has this problem where she can't eat anymore and she just pretty much withers away.
Yeah.
And there's a lot about like these characters, especially that family, like having sand in their mouth, like they can't speak, and it's like their mouths are full of sand. And I think that's kind of an interesting metaphor for that, especially I think when thinking about the history of this region, and she talks about how it was, once an ocean, now it's a desert. And that's them maybe becoming closer to the land towards death.
Yeah, because we all turn to dust, right? It's already like in their mouths. Yeah, I really like that image too. It's like haunting, but there's something also beautiful to it because of that connection to the land.
Yeah. So just before the first half ends, on 74, that section, it kind of steps away from the characters, and it's talking about the street, more of the history of the street, and I think that's kind of an interesting shift, because I think the halfway point, the street having its stories. I don't want to. I mean, it kind of starts talking about death and like the children, and something more ominous that never came up at the end of that section was talking about the children, right? They heard the voices without bodies. Sleep came hard and late, and when they did sleep, they were still afraid. They were surrounded by evil. And I thought maybe there would be an exploration of like a malevolent force in the neighborhood. That would be, but I'm like, oh,
It's the families.
true. Yeah, I think maybe that's
Yeah, but definitely had that vignette, vignette vibes.
right.
It was giving,
Yeah,
which again, kind of going back to your point, Vanessa, like there's a lot of like very interesting descriptions, right? And summaries also, like whether of the setting, of the food, of the men, right? Like on 56 here, and who ruled these men, the demons, alcohol, pride, the belief in control, and their twisted sex lives that live behind the walls of the streets, houses. They were all weak, contaminated men. For whatever reasons, they all had been polluted, and in their desire to be controlled for whatever was out of control in them, and so much was, they victimized those closest to them. So yeah, there's a lot of great passages like that, and then in the one that you were reading, Richie, I like how going back to the personification of the street having its mañas, right? And so there is some of that, Spanish thrown in that kind of wanted to see more of.
and a lot of Spanish slang. I think peppered all throughout.
Peppered like a good dish.
Exactly. You can't use too much, or else you over season it.
Now I'm hungry.
Uber Eats.
I just want to talk about one last passage before the last passage that Richie talked about on page 72. How could things have turned out this way? What happened to her? What happened to the children on this street? What was wrong with their families? What happened to their fathers, to their mothers? Were all the children lost like she and Michael were? I just really like that one, like the questioning of like, I guess a reflection of like who they're becoming because of the things that they experienced because of their parents, but also because of the things that their parents experienced themselves.
Yeah, that was a passage I highlighted as well for that reason.
Yeah. I feel like that kind of encompasses a lot of what especially Linda and Michael think about throughout the entire novel.
That was another. I talked about. No, we don't have to do this for the episode. But I talked about inconsistencies. In that next paragraph, it talks about the bar being called the Happy House. But previously it was called the Happy Lounge.
The Happy Lounge.
Yeah. I was like, wait, what?
I was like, where
Unless
are we?
there's two bars themed. And she emphasized that theme, like, but it was anything but happy, you know? Like,
Yeah.
anyway, I'm going to cut that part out probably just.
But yeah, that was another one.
Yeah.
I noticed that one too.
It's an unreliable narrator or something.
What I chalked
The
it up
street,
to.
it's the ancestors.
They got to know everything.
They, I mean, don't they?
Ancestors.
Good talk, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Catch you on the next one.
Catch you on the flippity flip.
Okay, ready? Mm-hmm. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Literally Literary, recorded at Power at the Pass and brought to you by Border Senses. This episode, we began our discussion on Street of Too Many Stories by Denise Chávez. If you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Join us on our next episode and follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep.